All change is not growth, as all movement is not forward. Ellen Glasgow. I really like this quote because it reminds us that when we look at our business, change needs to be rooted in strategy to ensure that we aren't changing without growing and we aren't moving without direction. So over the next 45 minutes, we're going to talk about why good, profitable companies get stuck, what it takes to move a business from stuck to scaling, how to sustain that momentum once you get it, and then we'll connect this directly into the importance of succession planning. So by the end of tonight, you'll leave with a short practical action plan, a few things that you can start doing in the next 30 days to make a real difference in your business, even if you don't engage with a consultant. I want to make sure that your time here is valuable and that you leave with something to actually put into place with your business. So my philosophy for consulting is very simple. You don't need more complexity in your business. You certainly don't need me telling you how to ticket a furnace call. You need clarity about who does what, rhythm and how work flows, and real options for growth, step back, or even if you're planning to exit. And that's what we're going to focus on today. So I wouldn't be doing my due diligence as a consultant if I didn't first start giving you a context of the industry that we're looking at. So we're going to start with a really big picture of what's happening in skilled trades to begin with, and then we're going to go a little bit deeper into the more intimate level of running your own business. If we look at the skilled trades industry, we see some interesting things right now. It's a little bit small, but I'll outline the key parts here. So one, majority of small business face internal inefficiencies that stall growth and strain leadership bandwidth. I'm sure many of you have experienced that firsthand, unfortunately. Two, there's an aging workforce right now, and skilled trade shortages make staffing and leadership development urgent priorities. Again, something you might be feeling on a bit of an intimate level. Third, and this is where it starts to get a little bit interesting, it's estimated that $2 trillion in business assets are expected to change hands over the next decade, putting tremendous pressure on business continuity and preparedness. So the fourth point to make on this that's going to support that's really interesting, is that over 70% of Canadian small business owners plan to retire in the next 10 years, but 90% of those have no formal succession plan in place. Another staggering point, if you look a little bit further into that, of those 90%, only 34% of those businesses have even at the very least a small documentation or even communicated a plan for succession, leaving a lot up to chance and leaving a lot of opportunity for others to take advantage. So let's dive in a little bit closer in specific trends with where we're seeing with HVAC. So first, good news, recent study reported that in Canada, the HVAC market to see a compounding growth rate of 5.2% over the next 5 years, putting the market value of roughly $15 billion, US dollars, in the next 5 years. There's also powerful tailwinds around sustainability and electrification, heat pumps and other high efficiency systems that are driving a lot of new replacement work, both in residential and commercial. Here in BC, we seem to be on the leading edge of that, so that's exciting. And third, I'll preface this one as maybe not so great news. 25% of the workforce is approaching retirement in the coming decade. So there will be strong risk of labor shortage across Canada for the entire 2024 to 2033 period, and something many of us already might be experiencing. And last but certainly not least, 74% of Canadian HVAC companies are operating as micro businesses. So this sector is kind of categorized as highly fragmented, with no single company holding a bigger market share than 5%. So a lot of family-run businesses, a lot of independent operators, even though we are starting to see more consolidation. So now that we've kind of looked at the industry as a whole, let's look closer at the operational level for these HVAC businesses, like yours and many of you in the room, because there's some shared strength and some shared pain points among businesses, small to medium. So some strengths include strong technical expertise. You know how to design, you know how to install, and service systems properly. You also have a loyal customer base and have built a reputation over years or decades. And that's something that you should be very proud of, and the reason why a lot of people call you. Some common pain points for small businesses, though, are that the owner is central to everything. Decisions, quoting, pricing, key customer relationships, hiring, sometimes even doing the large installs themselves, or handling the tricky situations with customers. Another pain point is that growth is often in terms of demand, but not always translate to healthy margins or a balanced workload. So you can end up growing your top line, but also increasing your bottom line at the same time. Finally, there's often no clear path for leadership transition or exit, because most of that value is still tied up in you personally. And again, this brings huge risk as we start to look ahead for what the future holds. So now, taking all that information from these environmental scans, we can now better understand the realities of what we're facing tonight in this room. And they emphasize again the importance of today's conversation about talking about improving our operations as well as planning ahead for the future. So where then is the disconnect between growing market and a business that is getting stuck? Most of the time when we see a good trades business get stuck, it's not because there's not work out there. Demand for HVAC is strong and steady. The sticking point is usually internal execution is inconsistent. And how that looks. So one, growth without margins. Looks like a customer obsession that turns into inconsistent service due to lack of systems. You may have, your usual way of doing things, but it's not documented, it's not trained, and it's not measured. So when people get busy or new team members join in, the service level becomes very inconsistent. And add that pressure of trying to increase your profit margins, people begin to stray from the plan just to make it happen. Two, teams get stretched thin. Management's reaching burnout. It looks like disorganized rhythms, disorganized busyness. Everyone's working hard, but the work isn't always organized, clean, or repeatable in any way. You have people constantly chasing information, waiting on decisions, and it starts to stray from the original plan. Third, the founder is still central to everything. So hands-on leadership involves over-reliance on the leader. And this can lead to a lot of problems. And again, talking about burnout for the leader and planning ahead. If everything's wrapped up in you, it's hard to pass that on to someone else in the future. So the problem isn't that your goals are wrong. The problem is that the underlying structures and systems in place haven't been upgraded as the business has grown to support those goals. And before we move forward, I want to really clarify systems versus goals. So goals is where you want to go. They focus on tomorrow. Systems is what you need to do every day to get there. They focus on today. A quote I really love is from a book, Atomic Habits by James Clear. If you haven't read it, add it to your list. He says, you do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. Now, over time, businesses will hit some internal resistance, and we call this a stuck state. And there's three ways that we see this, and I'm going to dive into each of these in a little bit more detail, but to give you an idea of where we're going, the first one is overload. So too much, too fast, too thin. Second stuck state is a stall out. So growth slows, stress rises. And the third, which I hope none of you find yourselves in, but if you do, we have some ways that you can adjust from there, is free fall. So that's when you completely lose control of quality, team, or finances. So the first one, let's dive into this. Overload, too much, too fast, too thin. What does it look like? It looks like bottlenecks in quoting, scheduling, service calls. Quotes pile up on your inbox, scheduling is a daily juggling act, technicians are waiting for answers and approvals, customers are waiting for callbacks, and everyone is busy, but somehow business is still slipping through the cracks. Owner becomes central to approvals and problem solving, so it might feel heroic in some instances, but it's a huge risk in terms of dependency and creates unnecessary bottlenecks for your team to operate efficiently. We also see an overload that everyone's busy and it's making output inconsistent. So why does this happen then? There's growth without infrastructure. Business has grown in size and complexity, but the systems and structures of how work flows, who decides what, how information is passed through, haven't been redesigned to support that new growth. We also see there's usually no clear delegation or handoff system in place. So people may not be sure of what they own, they might not know what they're allowed to decide, when they need to escalate, and so everything escalates whether it's needed to or not, and things end up on your desk that someone else probably could have handled. So overload is often a sign for improvement in your basic processes and procedures. The second stuck state that we see is stall out. So signs of stall out are revenue plateauing. So you're still busy, but you're not seeing the same growth you used to. And we talk about growth in terms of profit in this phase. At the same time, maybe complexity has gone up. There's more staff, there's more jobs, there's more moving parts. You might notice repeat issues. So callbacks, reworks, miscommunication between the office and field, or between sales and installs. Customer satisfaction might still be okay, but it's taking you more effort to get it there. Leadership fatigue is also common in this state. So you or maybe one or two of your senior staff feel like you're constantly putting out fires instead of making progress, or you're feeling like you're constantly working in your business and not allowed to work on it. This happens because systems might be in place, but they were never meant to scale. So this worked maybe 10 years ago, but now you're having problems with them. There's also unclear roles and responsibilities. So lack of mid-level leadership or support for mid-level leaders, where service manager, project leads, or techs only outcomes in the areas that they're working in. There's also perhaps no mid-level leadership. So without that leadership layer, everything just comes up to you as the business owner. So in this state, we often hear owners say, I'm tired, I don't want to grow anymore, I just want to be manageable. And that's kind of a stall-out mindset. Before we go on to the third, I want you to share an interesting stat. So in Canada, 34% of Canadian businesses cite internal inefficiency as their #1 growth barrier. So if you're feeling like you're behind or you're a bit overwhelmed by what we've talked about so far, I want you to know that recognizing where your business is stuck will provide more strategic opportunities down the road. Being able to recognize will then empower you to be able to make better decisions suited forward that are rooted in a strategy instead of just kind of ad hoc. So the third stuck state, and again, I hope this is one that you don't find yourself in, but if you are, again, it's great to recognize and know that there's lots of opportunity to move forward from this one. This is free fall. So this is when key customers start leaving, a long-term foreman or service manager quits and suddenly realize how much they were holding the business together. Quality drops, safety or compliance issues pop up, you hear more complaints, both from customers and maybe even your team, and financially you might start seeing some surprises. Jobs that lose money, collection problems, tax or remittance issues, and sudden cash crunches. So often free fall is triggered by something specific. An owner hits burnout, has a health issue or needs to step away immediately, a key leader leaves, or a big customer changes direction. Because this business is so dependent on few people, any disruption has an outstanding impact on it. So the message isn't fear, it's just awareness. If we design a business that's less dependent on you as an owner or one key customer or one team member, you then reduce that risk of free fall. And you also make the business more attractive to a future buyer if we're looking ahead to succession. So we recognize that we might be stuck. How do you go from stuck, whether that's overload, stall out, or free fall, to then a healthy, controlled growth? We call it a reset. And the reset's not about blowing up your business or completely changing things. It's about intentionally rebuilding how it runs. So first, we want to recognize where your current systems are failing. Where are your bottlenecks? Where are the errors or callbacks? Where is everything flowing through you? Second, you want to audit those key processes and roles. So how does a service call actually flow from the time that a customer makes the phone call to you to the time that a tech arrives, fixes the problem, and your invoice is paid? What actually happens, who does what, and where does it break down along that process? Then you want to rebuild with clarity, accountability, and a rhythm. So that means clear processes, clear roles, consistent operating routine that align with your business strategy so people know to focus on when. The reset's practical, it's step-by-step effort for your business to get ready and ultimately help you begin to plan ahead for the future. So smart scaling in HVAC isn't just more jobs or more vans, it's scaling in a way that keeps you in control. So here are some 4 fundamentals of how to smartly scale for an HVAC business. First, we're going to look at that clear operating model. It's just, a big word to say that people know what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. And, often from the moment the phone rings through estimating to scheduling to install, there's a defined way of working, and everyone on that team is clear of that process. Second, we want to look at integrating tools. Now, there's lots of different softwares out there, and you might be using a whole number of them, but oftentimes where we see the disconnect is these softwares don't talk to each other, or one person's not using it, or there's some kind of hesitancy around it. So you want to make sure that smart scaling, your tools are actually supporting your processes rather than just patching over gaps or just there because they're there and someone told you needed it. The third is leadership depth. So remember we talked about having those mid-level leaderships. This is where you need people in your business who own outcomes, not just tasks. So in areas like service, projects, or operations, that will help take the pressure off the business owner and make the business a little bit more resilient. The fourth is job level profit visibility. So you need to know with reasonable accuracy which jobs, which service, which customer types are actually profitable. Without that, you can grow your revenue as big as you want, but your profit's not ultimately going to match that. So not to jump ahead, but these are also the exact things that a serious buyer or successor is going to look for when you plan ahead for succession, or eventually one day, maybe when you go to sell your business. So I'll give you a quick example of how this can look in practice from a client that we had. So we worked with a 12-person HVAC company. They're mostly residential with some light commercial. The owner was doing all the quotes over $10,000, which if you're in HVAC, you know that's a lot of quotes. Then they handled all the major customer issues, and they were also the acting service manager. There was no standard service process. Each tech was doing things a little bit differently when we actually saw what was happening day to day. Margins were inconsistent, and the owner was totally burnt out. So over 18 to 24 months, we focused on 3 things with them. First, we created clear estimating standards and was able to delegate quotes to their team members. We gave that person templates, pricing guides, and guardrails so that that person could take over the role with confidence and be able to execute the same way that the owner was. Second, we documented and trained a standard service workflow. So again, from call intake to dispatch to how the techs were communicating with the customer at the house to how and when invoices went out. So it was clear from the moment someone picked up the phone to when that customer left the customer journey, what was happening along the process, and everyone in the company was aligned. Third, we defined a small leadership team and redefined the owner's role. So over time, 60% of their time shifted from firefighting within the business to actual strategic work, coaching their leaders, reviewing numbers, focusing on the key customer relationships. And the result of this wasn't just higher profit margins, but also a more sustainable workload and a business that realistically someone could actually step into one day. So now that we've kind of talked about how you can grow, how do we sustain this growth? Because it's all well and fine to get your business going, but what happens once it gets going? So think of it this way. Scaling is about building capacity and structure. Sustaining is about the consistency over time. So we want to look at 3 pillars. 1, operational discipline, doing the basics the right way every day. That includes things like following the service workflow, updating job notes, and closing out jobs properly. Also want to look at a culture of accountability. So people do what they would do, and the results are reviewed regularly. That might mean simple scorecards or key performance metrics for key roles. Third, we want to look at a customer-centric execution. So making sure that your systems and habits still keep the customer at the center of all this. Clear communication, reliable scheduling, quality work. When these 3 things are in place, you get a business that's not only easier to run, but with significant more attraction to buyers and successors, because they can see that the performance is repeatable and not just dependent on you having your hands on everything in the business. We can do this reset by fine-tuning our operating rhythm. And because stuck businesses operate in chaos, while strategic business operate in a rhythm. In a stuck business, decisions are often ad hoc. Meetings, if they happen, are usually crisis meetings. Everyone's reacting to whatever's the loudest that day. In a strategic business, things are a more predictable rhythm. So a short daily huddle in the field for dispatch to align with what's happening in the day with the install team, a weekly leadership or coordinating meeting to look at job, staffing, and key issues, monthly review of financials and key metrics, and then even a quarterly planning session to make sure the priorities are adjusted to keep in line with the strategic plan. So it doesn't mean more rigidity in a business, it just means you handle issues in a more structured way, at the right level, at the right time, so not everything lands on your desk in an emergency. And this kind of rhythm is exactly, again, what buyers and successors are looking for, because it shows that a business is actually running on systems and not just heroics. So then, when and how should we plan for succession? I don't know if anyone's been counting, but I've said succession planning a fair amount of times. So I thought it would be good to just briefly describe what that is so we're all on the same page. Succession planning is the process of identifying and preparing future leaders to fill key roles in an organization when current leaders leave, retire, or move on. And this, in the simplest form, is the process of identifying what happens next to your business. And so in reality, there's three ways this transition can look. Either someone in your family continues the business, management or employees, someone in your family continues on the business, someone in your employees or management team takes over the business, or third, there's a sale to someone outside of the business, either a strategic buyer or someone that represents within the industry as well. So regardless of which path is taken, each succession plan requires clear expectations, defined roles and decision, as well as external support. And so one misconception we hear about succession planning is that it's just for retirement. And I want to challenge that mindset, because succession planning is ultimately about resilience, and is making sure your business can continue to operate if you're out of the picture temporarily or permanently. It protects continuity and confidence for your team, for your customers, and your family. When there's clear succession plan in place, your people are less worried about the future, and your customers are a lot more confident in your business. It also increases your business value because it reduces risks. A buyer who sees that leadership, systems, and knowledge are all tied up in you will be interested in paying a lot less than if they see your systems are in place and you are aware of the true value that you've created within your business. So even if you're 5, 10, 15 years away from retirement, starting to think about a succession plan is a way to de-risk your business and strengthen it for the future. So here's some more statistics that I thought were interesting that I wanted to share, specifically around the trades industry in Canada and around succession. So 39% of businesses are dependent on the owner for daily operations. So if you're feeling burnt out as the owner because everything's coming to you, you're not alone. That's representative of 39% of businesses. 70% of business owners plan to exit within the next decade. We talked about this earlier on, that $2 trillion worth of business assets that are going to transfer over. That's a huge number coming at us and a lot of change. 49% of businesses plan to sell to an unrelated buyer. That was an interesting one. And only 25% actually intend to sell to family. This has shifted a lot in the last few decades, but again, something to keep in mind, that your buyer might not be within your family or your network. It might be to someone unknown. Again, coming back to systems and understanding where the value is for those people. Proper planning, and this one is really interesting to me, can increase the value of a business by 30%. And that's through reduced risk and buyer confidence. So again, highlighting the importance of why having a succession plan is so important, that you get the most value of what you've built. You spent so many years pouring into your business. It's unfortunate that the last moment to see that go because there wasn't enough documentation. And Canada's overall successful exit and continuity plan is only 12%. So again, going back to that number that we shared earlier about how many businesses actually have a succession plan in place, you can see that that's related to the planning rate or the successful, exit rate of being only 12%. So the point isn't the exact percentages, and I don't expect you to remember those after tonight, but the point is planning has a real measurable impact on your options and your eventual outcomes of what you can get for your business. And so if we look at the three phases, How do we do this then? So let's break it into 3 steps. Preparation is number 1. So this is where you clean up your operations, clean up your financials, clarify your organizational matters, document key processes, make the business easier to understand and easier to operate, whether you own it or someone else does. The second key piece is transition. So in this phase, you start to identify those future leaders or key family members, or begin to talk to business brokers or business evaluators if you're looking to sell to someone outside of the organization. This means that you start shifting responsibilities, you might change your role, and you might look at building that leadership depth we talked about earlier. The third part is transfer. So this is where the addressing of the legal, financial, and tax structures is important to make sure that it's all communicated and properly addressed so that someone can take over the business in a nice way. I've seen this happen where there's plan for an employee to take over, all for it to come down to the very last moment where nothing had been in place for the business to legally allow that transfer to happen, and it took a lot longer and delayed the sale of the business, which left the owner even more exhausted and left some frustration within the company too. So the biggest mistake, and part of that example, is that owners often wait until they're right up against retirement to start thinking about succession. And succession planning takes a lot longer than people think. And spread out over a couple years is a much nicer way than having to push out your retirement because you weren't aware that it took a lot longer. So as we begin to plan for succession, we need to understand where that value lies. And I've hinted at it along this presentation, but I want to make it really clear of the important things that someone's looking for when they step into your business. So number 1, they're looking at your revenue and margins. Of course, that's obvious, but not just how big they are. They're looking at how stable and how diversified they are across customers, services, and service lines. They also care a lot about owner independence. Can this business continue to operate if the current owner is not there every day? Or is everything concentrated in one person's relationship and knowledge? Remember that stat about how many businesses are sold to external buyers. These buyers might not be in the trade. How are they going to run this business if nothing's structured in a way that they could hire someone to fill these roles? The third, clean, reliable financials are huge. So if your books are messy, outdated, or unclear, buyers will either walk away or they're going to heavily lower what they're willing to pay. They also want to see a strong team and a healthy culture because, again, we talked about earlier, it's hard to find good staff right now, and there's going to be quite a labor shortage. So we want to make sure that the business is in a nice, stable, healthy fit and that there's a good working culture. They also want evidence of clear and documented processes, again, especially around how you're delivering the consistent service and how you're managing your jobs. Every system and leadership improvement we've talked about so far directly leads into these values that successors are looking for. So then, how do you know if your business is ready for succession? We can flip these a little bit to see. So the business can run day to day without you being there all the time. You're still important, but you're not the only thing that's going to hold this together. We also noticed that key processes, so service installs, quoting, invoices, those are all documented and they're actually followed. They're not just written in a book and put on a shelf collecting dust. Your financials are also reasonably timely, accurate, and understandable. You and others can look at them quickly and see how the business is performing. There's also leadership depth, so people on your team who can make decisions and lead others in specific areas. And here's the really simple test. If you walked away for 4 weeks, could your business survive without you? Succession-ready businesses are also almost by definition simpler to run and less stressful today. So it's not just about planning for the future, it's also making your life easier now and being more successful within your business. So as this presentation comes to an end, this is the value that I want you to take away from today. So if you take a picture of any of the slides, which will be posted, this is the one I encourage you to do. And here are the things that I want to encourage you to set over the next 30 days. So when you look at your business, I want you to identify 1 or 2 areas where the business is too dependent on you. Maybe it's pricing certain jobs, maybe it's dealing with certain customers, or solving scheduling problems. Write those down. Pick then 1 or 2 of these processes to document, understand what's actually happening, who's involved, where the problems are coming up, and where the bottlenecks are. Then I want you to look at replacing yourself in that specific area or someone else on your team and implementing operational efficiencies with clear guardrails to alleviate this issue. Then I want you to start a conversation about what your long-term goals are. Talk to someone, whether it's a family-run business or you're looking for employees to take over, someone on your leadership as to what a plan looks like moving forward and how this business will end. Again, going back to small, consistent steps over time, compounding will help take your business to that next level. Thank you guys all so much.